Hello, I'm Christina Howe, and for my presentation today I'm going to be discussing the film The Post by Steven Spielberg. The Post is from 2017, but it's a film about the 1970s. It focuses on the year 1971, when a massive government scandal is uncovered by a whistleblower about the Vietnam War. The Post is a really in-depth movie, and I probably will not do it justice in this really quick summary. But for a brief overview of just the really important things, now there's a government analyst who goes to join the troops in Vietnam to study what is happening with the war. And he has this horrifying experience. He's really moved and motivated by it to steal classified documents that are top secret and have them copied. These become known as the Pentagon Papers. The whistleblower, Dan, sends these stolen documents to members of Congress and adversaries of President Nixon. Now, the government is still not acting. There's overwhelming inaction on the behalf of everybody that Dan has sent these papers to. He's frustrated. So in 1971, he hands these papers over to a lucky reporter from the New York Times. The Times is a competitor of the Washington Post. Now, the Nixon White House uses their power to shut down the New York Times with an injunction. Since the New York Times is stopped up, Dan now passes the documents to the Washington Post. The heart of this movie is really centered around the concept of the freedom of the press and what are the responsibilities of the press, what are the limitations of the press. Now, when we learned about rights ethics, we really learned that with rights comes responsibilities. In the film, we have this really great debate scene. It's really emotional and intense. It's between Katharine Graham, the owner of the newspaper, The Washington Post, and her editor-in-chief, Ben, and the board of directors who happen to be present during this conflict. Now, there's this issue of consequence and duty, and they're sort of pitted against one another. On the one hand, the board of directors does actually have a duty to their investors and their shareholders to make money. There's a lot at stake for them as a business. Now, for Ben, the real issue is the urgency of getting these papers out to the public. Now, for Katharine, she's really stuck balancing all of this and weighing it all against her values and her vision for the future of her paper. So in this debate scene that takes place, Katharine's really faced with a decision of duty. She really has to weigh her options between her obligations and find a priority. On one hand, there's this pure sense of duty where she is a newspaper owner and she has a responsibility to the public. She has a responsibility to the press and to stand up to government oppression and to really get information out to the people. On the other side of this is this sort of personal duty, this balance of utility, really, that her responsibility to shareholders is to earn them money. That's why they've invested in her as a business. She also has to maintain relationships that her company has worked hard to earn. Ultimately, Katharine finds that her choice is guided by the categorical imperative and not consequence or utility. She's acting on her reasoned intuition and showing that she can really trust her intuition to guide her. She's really found the values that she wants to lead with. Whistleblowers, they get a bad rap. They end up in unenviable positions. Ultimately, though, staying quiet is not the easy thing to do for a whistleblower driven by a sense of duty and their virtues and ethics. And those virtues are what plague the whistleblower, Dan, knowing that men will keep dying in a war. When we think about deontology, we sometimes think about the test of deontology being that sort of categorical imperative. Are we doing the right thing for the simple sake of doing what is right? Dan in this movie has weighed the consequences of what could happen to him as a whistleblower, his future, what could happen to his family, his job, what are his risks. He ultimately decides that none of that is as important as the duty to do what is right. We typically consider whistleblowing an act of deontology, but there's also these benefits that could be argued by a utilitarian. So both Catherine, the owner of the paper, and Dan, the whistleblower, were faced with really heavy consequences if they acted on publishing the Pentagon Papers. The consequences to both of them were really legal and would take place in a courtroom. The consequences of not acting on publishing these Pentagon Papers would be an endless war in Vietnam. Since not acting would have more severe consequences to more people and would do greater harm, they made the really self-sacrificing move of acting. In all three of these theoretical interpretations of duty, utilitarianism, and virtue, we can see that the choices to make the Pentagon Papers public were really justified. Ellsberg didn't win his case, but he didn't lose either. His case was tossed out in a mistrial when the Watergate scandal broke and was exposed by the Washington Post at a later date. The Supreme Court did rule in favor of the press, upholding the First Amendment. In some past cases, the courts have suppressed sensitive information from being published, which is what makes this case a very important precedent for freedoms and rights. The Post is a really great film to watch if you're learning about ethics, if you're wondering what it looks like when the courts weigh out different ethical dilemmas to determine what the right answer really is. They're determining priorities based on philosophies and principles that are really grounded in deontology and utilitarianism that really shape our Constitution. And finally, we have my list of sources. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.